The ramblings of a woman obsessed with time and shame. Music always hit a sour note when trying to learn while unknowingly dyslexic in 1982. This is my brutal truth. The harsh tones of my mother were barely audible, but the deep baritone of Mr. Lanza was unmistakable. Never had I assumed to be his star pupil, but his words cut deep just the same. What was wrong with me? Why did I never learn? At 7, I didn't know the difference between piano and organ lessons. My music teacher taught both, after all, yet the piano sat front and center in his tiny parlor, while the organ was deliberately tucked into the corner. Not until I was swallowed by the darkness of the car did my mother scold me for playing the piano. I thought I'd broken a rule, or that I'd done something dreadfully wrong to embarrass my mother. By playing the piano at my intended organ lessons, I had betrayed her somehow. So she put an end to my organ lessons. This should have made me happy. After all, it was what I wanted. Was it not? Music lessons were just another sharp piece of my childhood. When it floated around me, I would break into a cold sweat and clasp my hands as a way to keep them from shaking. It was like scheduling a weekly nightmare. Every Tuesday at 6:30, I would have to read aloud for an hour. This was my biggest fear. Half of my lesson was theory. Here, I literally had to read the music notes aloud. The other half was practical, where my fingers outed me for the illiterate fraud I was to an extremely staunch Mr. Lanza. Compared to the many big scary men in my life, Mr. Lanza, my music teacher, was a gummy bear. A hairy, stout gummy bear that smelled of spicy aftershave. But that did not mean that he was not daunting. The way his shoulders hunched with every wrong note or careless fingering was worse. In some way, his defeated slump was more difficult than any harsh word or deep scowl. In grade 2, I had enough trouble reading words, let alone music notes, on a page full of clustered lines. Practicing never seemed to help, so I never bothered with it, despite my mother's gripes. Like every child, I wanted to be liked and accepted, especially by those who were likely to pass judgment or evaluation. By continuously disappointing and frustrating Mr. Lanza, he practically curled into himself, like every note was a slap. As he shrank beside me, so did my hopes of earning his approval and favor. This did not stop me from trying, though. True to my talents, I did all that I could to distract the man from the task at hand, hoping that he would overlook my musical misgivings. Maybe he would find something else about me that was likable. Each week, when I entered the bright parlor, the gleaming baby grand piano greeted me first. It was so beautiful, dark cherry wood, so stunning that I would stop in the doorway just to stare at it before I turned my back to sit at the organ. Yep, an organ. Neither of my parents played an instrument, yet one of their prized possessions was a flipping organ that did nothing in the front of our home but collect dust. Okay, that was a lie. My sisters played, not often, but way more than I did. Thankfully, my feet did not reach the pedals, so I only had to learn notes and fingerings, which was bad enough. Miss Emily, what is this note, that one right here? Mr. Lanza asked, with more patience than I deserved, because after many weeks, I still didn't know. Every good boy deserves fudge, remember. Every good... His pointer scratched and thumped the page propped up in front of me with every word. Every good... He repeated, and I realized I was being prompted. Boy, B, it's B, I said. It's a B, he said in a tired voice I was becoming to know. Mr. Lanza? Yes, Emily. Would you play it for me so I can hear what it's supposed to sound like? I asked. This was my usual request. One that he was reluctant to indulge, but always did. And it worked. I could feel the stress lift from him when he played, his odd, hairy knuckles gently curled as he plucked delicately at the keys. Not only did this break his tension, which seemingly straightened his spine, but this was how I learned to play every piece assigned to me. I watched his fingerings, memorized the keys, and secured the melody in my mind. After we switched places, he was taller than me again. The music changed him, and it had the power to lighten him. Always proper Mr. Lanza would be slumping again with the turn of the next page, my random jabs at the organ keys, my wandering eye over the foreign lines and notes weighing him down. Biding my time, I waited for his pointer to slap the page, a sure sign of his growing irritation with his unteachable student. "Mr. Lanza?" "Yes, Miss Emily," he asked, his question more a sigh of exhaustion. "Could we maybe play at the piano?" Beneath his large caterpillar-like eyebrows, his gaze slid from me to the piano and then back to me. Did he know this was another effort to distract? With a slow nod, he seemed to decide on something bigger than switching instruments. With that, I pulled the music book from its decorative stand and sat in awe behind the enormous, beautiful piano. That particular piece did not sound any better, even to my ear. In fact, I was sure that my playing alone was an insult to the baby grand's craftsmanship. The agony did not last long before we heard my mother slip into the adjacent waiting room. Her boots bumped off snow as quietly and politely as possible. With that, Mr. Lanza stood and tugged at the bottom of his jacket. "Miss Emily, I would like you to work on your scales now." "All right, Mr. Lanza," I said, happy to be at the end of our lesson, even though it seemed rather early. That's when I heard it. I had completed the scale in C minor, set in the pause as I repositioned my hands, were the harsh tones of my teacher. Strained to decipher my mother's soft voice, Mr. Lanza's was unmistakable. "Bass travels further than treble, didn't you know?" "Give up on this one, Mrs. Wright," he said. A stone I hadn't known in my chest swelled coldly until it pressed against my throat. It was hard to breathe and harder to swallow. With panic-trembling fingers, I flipped the pages of my book nervously as a way to drown them out. Not wanting to hear the rest of their conversation, I busied myself by playing C major scale again and again, not daring to make a mistake. Pain shot through my lips as I bit them together in hopes to will my eyes not to well up or drop tears on the beautiful piano keys. Rejection, even warranted, can leave its scars. "Emily, it's time," my mother said. I slipped between them and out the door as soundlessly as possible. The car ride home was quiet and cold. The December dark had swallowed the early evening sky, leaving even the clouds lonely. The heater blasted, but offered no comfort. There I waited through her deafening silence because I knew she was beyond mad. I had disappointed her again with my failure to learn, my defiance to play, and my betrayal of the organ. She never told me that I would not be going back to Mr. Lanza, but the icy spot in my heart knew that I would never see the kind man again. My chance to say goodbye and thank him for his hopeless effort had gone forever. It was 4 years later when Mr. Lanza was in the forefront of my thoughts. My 6th grade teacher loaded a wire contraption that held an alignment of 5 pieces of white chalk. Immediately after pressing it to the board with one long, straight stroke, I recognized the music stand from my childhood books. For the first time at school, I was familiar with a lesson before my teacher could begin. In every space between the lines, Mr. Gregor drew a circle. In each circle, he wrote the letters F-A-C-E. Then he moved to the lines. In these circles, he wrote E, G, B, D, F. I saw it. For the first time in my life, I saw it right there laid out in front of me, so simple, so basic. Before I could stop myself, I was standing in the middle of my classroom, staring at the chalkboard. I get it! I finally get it! The jeers and snickers from the other kids was easily ignored. My fellow classmates did not faze me. It was as if someone had flipped on a light and I was finally able to see. The joy I felt bubbled up and fizzed, making sitting an impossibility. The stars had somehow aligned, and I could see something that had been right in front of me all along. One disapproving glance from Mr. Gregor did not dash my enthusiasm, but it did sober me enough to take my seat. For a long moment, I could only stare at the two distinct note arrangements on the board. Right there in black and white, I could see the piece that I was missing from the beginning, the alphabet. Why would you separate notes by lines and spaces to come up with some ridiculous saying? The spaces are FACE and the lines make up every good boy deserves fudge, they would say. When you put them together, you get EFGABCDEF. Why would no one ever point out the already known pattern of the alphabet? Did no one ever consider that there might be a different way of teaching, especially when faced with a student who seems unteachable but not unwilling? I am dyslexic, and this is my brutal truth.